So my name is Davey. I live in Tamworth and I'm working at UNE and I've been researching since January 2021. At the moment, I'm reading a very classic novel, Sherlock Holmes, by Arthur Conan Doyle. I'm binge watching Big Bang Theory for about the fourth time, and I love a true crime podcast called Morbid. So I grew up in a rural community and have pretty much always lived in one, and then have always been interested in criminology, and that's what I went and studied at university, which then led me to working in correctional centres and community corrections, which then led to my PhD after that. So from there, applying my research in the rural context just made sense, seeing as what I'm researching is more of a problem in rural spaces. My research is looking at the role that punitive attitudes and attitudes towards Aboriginal people within community members impacts Aboriginal people's interaction, with the criminal justice system, particularly the reintegration into the community post-release from custody, and specifically how that is impacted and exacerbated by living in a rural area. So my research has three phases. The first phase is looking at those attitudes on a wider level, so using a representative sample of Australia and looking at the driving factors of those, so things like media consumption, political ideology, those types of things. And then the second phase is looking at those attitudes and things that drive them specifically in rural spaces. And then the third phase is flipping it all on its head and actually interviewing, hopefully interviewing Aboriginal people about their experiences as they've tried to reintegrate into the community after release and through their journey throughout interacting with the criminal justice system. So I think stemming from my research, obviously I'm looking at over-incarceration of Indigenous people as an overarching sort of theme of that. And I think that over-incarceration is a big problem. And I don't think it's being talked about enough or really being addressed hugely. So from my experience working in the criminal justice system, a bias is a big part of that issue. And this then in turn obviously has a big impact on reintegration. And when people don't reintegrate well, they tend to end up reoffending and end up back in custody. And from the small amount of research that exists on this topic, it tells us that this is an issue, particularly in rural spaces, because Indigenous people, they tend to come out of custody and return to the rural places where they grew up and where they live, and then fall back into the same patterns, the same social circles, and then can end up reoffending from there. So I think that's a big problem, particularly in rural crime, that's not being addressed really. And if I had a magic wand and could do anything to address this problem, twofold approach. So I would firstly increase education, because I believe that's a big part of it. So for both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people. So in my opinion, Aboriginal people need to be educated on how to break this cycle of reoffending and where they can go to find help and all of that kind of stuff. And then non-Aboriginal people need to be educated on Aboriginal issues, so things that lead to offending and ways that their behaviour can impact someone else. And then secondly, I'd funnel as many resources as possible into support programs and organisations to help people reintegrate into the community, because I think from my first-hand experience, having worked as a part of those sort of change makers in the justice system, so parole officers and people like places like that, they're severely understaffed and they're expected to carry a caseload of 30 to 40 people, and you just can't, often you can't put the time needed into each person to help them, I think is a big problem.